Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest moving forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For July, we're focusing on the rise of violence. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Jesenia Pizarro, who is a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Arizona State University. Her research focuses on the events and situational factors that result in violence, the processing of violent crime in the criminal justice system, and anti-violence strategies. Let's get into the interview. It's no secret that America experiences a lot of gun violence. In fact, according to the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, nearly every American will know at least one victim of gun violence in their lifetime. Over 1 million Americans have been shot in the past decade, and gun violence rates are rising across the country. In 2021, gun deaths reached their highest level in at least 40 years, with 48,830 deaths that year alone. The U.S. accounts for just 4% of the world's population, but 35% of global firearm suicides, and Americans are 25 more times likely to be killed in a gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. Today, we're exploring the rise in violence with Arizona State University's Dr. Jesenia Pizarro, whose research explores correctional practices in the United States. Dr. Pizarro is a member of the Firearm Safety Among Children and Teens Consortium, or called FACTS, and the Homicide Research Working Group, called HRWG. She has worked with police departments, agencies throughout the country in joint efforts to curb violence and has managed federally funded grants that focus on curbing violence and inmate partner homicide prevention, awarded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Office of Juvenile Justice, and Delinquency Prevention, National Institute of Health, and National Science Foundation in various capacities and roles. She currently serves as the editor-in-chief of Homicide Studies. Welcome, Dr. Pizarro.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to speak to you today.
Yes, I'm so happy to talk about this topic because it is, I guess in America it is always timely.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yes. But lately, as we've seen in these, years of the pandemic and since, more and more things have unfolded that have, I guess you could say, shocked most of us out of our seats. So before we get into the interview, I always like to get to know a guest a little bit more personally. So what made you pick criminology to study as a major in college?
So I grew up in the inner city of Newark, New Jersey, and during the height of the crack epidemic. So I saw a lot of crime and victimization, and I always wanted to do something to help my community and to help people. And I was fascinated by why people engaged in things that were mean or not so nice to others, and I thought that meant I wanted a career in law as a judge. But it turned out that the better path for me was to be a social scientist, so that I can work in providing an understanding for why these things occur, but while providing that understanding, also be able to tailor and to suggest actual prevention strategies.
Wow. Okay. That's I always think it's cool when people take their real life experience and then start to expand it in ways that they can go out and help those people, not only in their community, but just society. So I commend you for doing that.
Thank you.
I just on a personal note, I know I took like one criminology class in college, and I was leading out the forensic and And then I remember my
Mhm.
family was like, you'll probably start to feel so down. They start looking at dead people all day. But I know it's
Yeah.
very interesting. I know it's very interesting. So that's one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you, because I know it's a very exciting field in of it
Mhm.
itself, but also with your expertise and specifically, when you focus on gun violence, which of course here in America has been like the hot button.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess when let's start at the beginning. So in I guess we'll just say in America, because America seems to lead the
Mhm.
world with this problem. I guess what do you think makes America, I guess, different than other countries in the world?
Well, in terms of, so what makes us stand out to other similar countries is our rates of firearm harm, right, and firearm related harms. And one of the obvious things that make us different, so that can explain those rates, is that unlike many of our sister countries, we guns are sewn into the fabric of American culture. We have a Second Amendment, which is something that other countries that are similar to us don't have. So the ability to own a firearm, and the ability to own multiple firearms, right, it's something that is protected under our constitution. That when you compare us to places that are like us, they don't have those abilities.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I also, I don't know if would you say there's like a different mentality, I guess, across the board here in comparison, or not really?
I don't know if it's so much of a different mentality, although there has been research on different subcultures in the United States. One of probably some of the oldest theories related to this. There's one that talks about the Southern culture, and how there's a culture of chivalry and protection that makes it more acceptable to respond to violence. We also know that on research, that more current research right now that is done on urban areas, it talks about the emergence of self-help type cultures, where people feel like they need to take matters into their own hands due to not having any faith in the formal legal systems, right? So because of a history of abuse by the legal system, histories of discrimination, people might not feel as though these legal systems are there to protect them. So they're more likely to take matters into their own hands and calling the police, for example, because of that history and fear that they're going to be victimized on the hands of the police. So I think that's something. I have not done comparative research in other countries, but that's definitely something that comes out a lot when you look at the literature on violence. This whole idea of the Southern subculture of violence, as well now as since the 1990s, research that is looking at urban violence and the subcultures that emerge in urban environments.
Yes, and that makes sense, because I was about to ask you, like, is American just violent? That's that's kind of the picture that the rest of the world has gotten in the last years. Yeah.
Yeah, they that is the picture from, like, when I talk to like folks and researchers from other countries, right, particularly some of the European countries. They're always like, what is going on in the United States? I think that I wouldn't say that Americans are just violent. I just think that there are some subcultures that are rooted in our history that are regarded as more violent than others, right? And that are rooted in the fabric of of how our country was built, right? That are rooted in that fabric of the consequences that, and we're seeing right now the consequences of things like slavery and segregation um and those things that are probably more unique to us than they are to other places. um
Yes, and I guess that leads me to one of the things, of course, when people think about violence, and the instant picture that comes to people's minds, I think, are black and brown people, right? Uh,
mhm,
and so I guess I want to touch on the image, and maybe a stereotype, and and just kind of dive into it. So, even statistically, Black and brown people seem to face more violence than other
mhm.
groups. And so, why do you think that is?
I think, and based on what the research would say, I think it's is a function of the social structure of the country, right? There is big correlations between violence and social class, and I hate using the word social class. um it's better, I think it's better to say things like poverty, right? There, because of the history of the United States, because we're still, it's been a long time, but we're still feeling the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow, which have created a situation where Black and brown folks are more heavily concentrated in the poverty lines. And when you look at that, it has an effect on multiple aspects of your life, right? It has an effect on things like the type of medical care that you get. It has an effect on things like how are you going to be exposed to toxins that can create bad health effects and externalizing behavior. It has an effect on education and opportunities for better education. It has an effect on what type of employment opportunities are there. And more importantly, it also has an effect on how the criminal legal system reacts to you, right? So we know, for example, and there's been research that's been done on policing, is that based on where you live, the type of policing that you're going to get is going to be different, right? So if you live in an urban area that's characterized by poverty and consequently higher crime rates, the police might be a little bit more aggressive, or a lot more aggressive, when they police you in that community versus what they're policing in other places. So all these things are conflated with each other, among themselves, to create environments that are ripe for crime and that are ripe for the emergence of violent crime, right? So they create the cycle, right? Now, people in these environments may not be getting the proper nutrition and healthcare, which can manifest itself in certain things. And you couple that with, the children are not getting the proper opportunities or the proper education that they need to succeed and break those cycles. So it's just a never ending cycle that are created, that unfortunately we're still seeing due to policies from the turn of the century, the previous century, that have affected people. Um, and I went into my criminology lecturing mode. So if you
That's no, no,
clarify it.
no, no, no. I appreciate it. That's what we like on this
Mhm,
podcast. That's we like to, talk to
mhm,
the people who are the experts.
mhm,
And so, you bring up a point that I think a lot of people continuously miss. And I think it's purposely missed, because we like easy, right? So it's easy just
Yeah.
to classify people and say, well, it's just how they're made, right? But they don't consider all these external factors that are playing into a human being's, psyche, emotional, and even physical health. And
Yeah.
that, essentially it's almost like you're in a pressure cooker.
Yes, yes. And it's not as simple, right? So some people would say like, yeah, people make choices, but what they don't understand that those choices don't occur in a vacuum, right? That all of us have our influence and our behaviors and how we react to things and are influenced by our social context and what we're surrounded of and our upbringing so the outside social affects the inside of us, and unfortunately there's still a lot of inequalities in the United States that affect some groups more than others.
Yes, and then I think, and this I know I'm stretching it a bit, but I think with the pandemic, it even well, no, I guess I'm not really stretching it a bit. I think the pandemic even highlighted more and more of those inequalities, right?
Yes,
And
definitely.
and also brought people who maybe weren't experiencing any of these things into that now news cycle, and they're like, what? I never had to deal with this and deal with that, and oh my goodness, right? When the kids, so
Yeah.
many people were out of work. They had to now, go into maybe programs or start acting into systems that they never even knew existed. So, since the pandemic, every day I purposely don't every day anymore, like watch the news because there's only so much I can, emotionally handle. So I take my, I take my news days now and catch up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but how would you say that, the pandemic, exacerbated this problem?
So before the pandemic, we were starting to see steady increases in violence, right? But I think that the pandemic actually like just it just like moved everything forward, and definitely the pandemic definitely brought extra stresses to the general American population, and you couple that with and I'm not a political scientist or historian, but there was also around the pandemic this change in rhetoric, right? Where people just felt like it was okay to go and insult
Okay.
others, which is probably a topic in your of another podcast episode.
Yes, it
There was
was actually.
a
Yes.
change of
Right.
rhetoric coming from the top down to us. Then you add a pandemic. Um, I just feel that in maybe 100 years from now, right? Our grandkids are going to be studying this, but it feels to me that there's been like a shift in culture and stuff that were then coupled with the pandemic, and now all of a sudden you see these extra high rates of violence. But one of the things I think that's very important to note is that for whatever reason, um, gun sales went up during the pandemic, right? The gun sales went up. People were arming themselves more. I guess the fear of like a crash of the country, I don't know. But gun sales went up. And with that increase in gun sales, right, we also saw an increase in firearm mortality.
Yeah, yes. And, I think a lot of people don't realize in America there's more guns than there are people.
Yes, well, that's what we think, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Interestingly enough, you hear these stats. That's like our best type of estimates. Nobody knows how many guns are in this country because of the Second Amendment. We're not about we can't really trace it. There's like we have these estimates based on how many are sold, but those are from federal licensed dealers. We don't know what private sellers are selling. And then we estimate based on that, or subscriptions to gun and ammo. But we don't really have great records, or a great tracking system for firearms. You can't do that. At least it's been blocked.
Amen. Yes.
Previously, but yeah, there's a lot of guns. Based on gun sales, we know that there's a lot of guns. We don't know exactly how many, but we know it's a lot.
Yes. I started having this vision as you were talking about, like, I know we're the West, the wild, wild West, and then out and a
Yeah.
bunch of, and like everybody here is like a cowboy ready to shoot. That, we have that image. Unfortunately, like, okay, push our buttons and bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, well, that's literally how I think some of our friends from other countries look at us, right? They think it's
the
think it's
cowboys.
a Western.
Yes. Yeah, it's fighting cowboys. Yes.
Yeah.
So speaking of gun violence, because this topic obviously is a hot topic, continuously in the news, politically, socially, and it continues to come into play. It's become kind of a little bit, I would say, of a broken record, because every time there's a shooting, which happens, like, I would say we're getting to a point probably almost weekly. Somebody, something goes down. And, and then people get on there and say, the same old thing, like, should we have gun control? And then there's a debate on the news between one person for it and one person not for it. But why do we continue to, go into this, like, circle? Do you think there should be gun control in the U.S.?
I don't call it gun control. I think that there's things that can make safety, right? So I call it more gun safety. So because this whole idea of gun control means like you're controlling all guns. But what we know, right? We know for a fact that the majority of gun owners are general, law-abiding people. The majority of people who we have records of, right, are law-abiding people. They're not doing anything. They're using their guns for sport or for hunting. So I think what we this rhetoric has come out, and I think is used as a scare tactic for people that don't understand what that the real, for most of us that do this type of work, what we're asking is to put safety in place, right? Why I think I think that guns have become a taboo, and there's people that just don't have a lot of understanding because of the way things are discussed. So that's why I always say gun safety, because I think we all agree that if you have a weapon that can kill people, maybe we need to talk about safety measures so that you don't kill people. I mean, especially innocent people. So I forgot, I lost my train of thought, but we need to oh yes. So, and I think one of the reasons that there is a lack of knowledge is because until very recently, until the past 5 years, right? There was not even research in this area due to federal legislation, the Dickey Amendment that passed in the 1990s. Pretty much public dollars weren't allowed to be used to study firearms, very little public dollars. So there's this gap in knowledge, and we until I think the first CDC panel was put forth in 2020, where CDC funds went to study firearm violence and firearm related harms. So there's a gap in the knowledge base, and there's not a lot of research to inform stuff. Now the research is occurring, but yeah, I think it's just it could be lack of knowledge and scare tactics that are used by some pundits to scare people about things like they're going to come take away your guns. This is un-American, without actually presenting people with the facts and what is actually being proposed. So for example, one of these things that are being proposed is and that I think 18 states have it as extreme risk protection orders, right? That's not going to take away everybody's guns. That's just pausing somebody's Second Amendment right if they have threatened to kill someone or kill themselves. If you threat to go shoot a place up, I think we could all agree in gun safety that maybe you shouldn't gun, right? Or if you're threatening or you have suicidal ideation, I think we can all agree that probably at least the person's family can agree, like we don't want them to have a gun because we don't want them to commit suicide, right? Is I yeah, so being able to do that more.
Mm-hmm. And so speaking of, I'm thinking of two scenarios that are continuously popping up these days. The unfortunate situations of school shootings that seem to be on the rise. So we have, a whole generation, they're not even making it to adulthood before they're, slinging guns. Becoming mass murderers. Why, I guess, I have a couple questions of this, and I'm sure these are questions that a lot of people have. Why do you think that there's a rise in school shootings? Have like children really changed that much?
I don't. I think it's due to a rise in opportunity, right? I think there's more guns out there, and it's just easier to access, right? And I'm not a child psychologist or developmental psychologist that examines youth that way, but one of the things that we know is that and as a criminologist who study situational factors, the first thing that comes to mind is that there's just an increased opportunity because we know that there are more guns out there, right? So, which if you're not securely handling your gun or putting your gun away, it just creates more easier access, right? So I think one of the things that we have to explore is how do you limit that access of especially of young kids, right? How do you limit that access?
Yes. Because like it seems to be that either the parents have guns, or I guess, or people or young people have figured out how to do everything online. Yeah.
Well, figured out how to go everything
Yeah.
online, but depending on the state, you can go after a certain age, you can go to Walmart and get a gun, right? Some states, that's the way it is. It's part of the culture, right? And that's just the way it happens. So I think what some gun safety scholars will say is, perhaps we should not make it that easy, because when you just open it up for everyone, you have an increased risk of people that shouldn't doing it, right?
Yes.
And getting one.
Yes, and then the other hot, there's two other hot buttons. First, I'm going to do one that touches on at least 50% of the global population. Is there's a rise in women being killed or victimized as well. One of the things that I have been highlighting through a lot of our podcasts this year, and maybe even last year I did it, is that it seems that women are under the microscope in a whole different way than I've ever seen in history. And so, and then women have become, I guess you always have to have your shield.
Yeah, there's so many things going on. I've just lost track of it, right? Like there's so many things and legislations and proposals and stuff that are related to limiting women that it's just that again, that's another podcast. But I'm always like, what now?
Yes. Do you think that there's a correlation? You can just answer this. I know you're not a psychologist, but is there, this is something that I'm doing kind of way out there on the thought, but do you think that because of the lack of, like, our society has become much more, what's the best word? I guess, yes, we're materialistic, but we don't like less empathetic, I guess, just to people, right? And do you think because women, and I'm being a little bit stereotypical, but if we want to look from a biological standpoint, women are the ones that bear children, right? And so, and because there has been like this lack of empathy, of this disregard, essentially for life, as this violence and guns and everything keep rising. Do you think that has a correlation of why then women are being killed and victimized?
I think it's complex. I never thought of it that way. It could be, right? I think that in recent years, there's definitely it appears to me, and I'm not a gender studies person, but it appears to me that in recent years there's a lot more emphasis on controlling women and what women do, right? And one of the things that we do know about things like intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide, that there is a level of control there. So the rhetoric seems to match, right? The rhetoric also seems to match, and you touched upon something I didn't say so eloquently before, but was that I feel, and I'm speaking just like a regular human now, that people are just not as nice maybe as before. I think that in the past 10 years, it's been okay to just be mean and uncivil to others. I think before, I just felt that there was a degree of decorum that you just don't go around saying stuff to people like that. Very few people. So I think there's been a freedom now that you can just do and say outlandish things that may not even be true to others, and there's just no consequence, right? Sometimes, like, I just like watch C-SPAN sometimes, and it's like, I can't believe that these people are saying this. This is like clearly not true. There's evidence to show that this is not true. And they're like, yeah, they just say it, because it's their fact. So that change in culture, I think that's something that people are going to be studying 100 years from now and saying, like, that's it, right? We're going to find that correlation. But in the realm of what I study, right, we do know that having a firearm in the home increases the risk for women by 400%, over 400% that they're going to be victimized. It's not the same for men, but for women, it's that because you're more likely to be victimized by somebody, by an intimate, by somebody you live with. It increases the risk. And then when you see that firearms have increased and sales have increased, then you would expect there's more firearms in the home. So now there's more risk for women in the home. So if you look at it purely in a situational aspect, in the areas that I have no expertise, I do think that there might be some relationship with this, what appears to be this new culture, or more outward culture on controlling women, right? Like when you look at reproductive rights, that's a control of women's body, or the other things that are happening.
Mhm.
It's an issue of control. Um,
Yes, definitely. And then, one of the other hot buttons that, arises a lot in the news, of course, is, killing of, I'll just say, Black people, Black
yes.
Americans. That's like if we, when we just say gun violence, I think it's the poster child image that just
Mhm.
arises instantly in the mind, which is unfortunate. But there have been a lot of, Black people that are getting killed in sometimes very horrific ways.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of them sometimes are children. And
Hmm.
so, and it's brought an uprising, I would say, in the Black community of, uh, uh, terror, but there's also how can Black communities, how would you suggest that they be safer and have less killings happen to them? Is there a way?
I don't, that's a packed question. I was just reading before our meeting, the latest shooting in Kansas City. I I wish I had a solution. I think we need to do a better job at educating people. I Again, one of the things that I have noticed, and just as a human, not as a criminologist, in the past 10 years, is that people are just more overt with their racism. It's like back in the day, I feel like they were like less overt, but now it's just like in your face racism. I think a lot of it is also fueled by the rhetoric that we're getting from the top down, right? And media and the things that you hear now. I don't know how to fix it. The only thing as a criminologist I could say is like, perhaps letting everybody without proper background checks, without um, checking, perhaps it's not a good thing to just let everybody have a gun, because if they have these fears that they have made up in their mind because of Fox News, they're going to victimize others. I wish I had a solution. And it's something that really bothers me, and it keeps me up at night because I don't know how to fix it. Other than, and I do what I can do is just make sure that as an educator, I am bringing facts and teaching my students facts. And I hope that by showing them facts and educating people, that they can, have more empathy, and when they go out into the world they are like good citizens. That's the And then I vote. Right. I don't miss an election, but I wish I can do more, and I just don't know what to do at this point.
Yes, it is it's a huge problem with probably a million layers.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yes,
And I'm
yes.
sorry if you're hearing blowers. The landscaper for across the street is here, and it's really annoying me.
No worries, no worries. I
Thank you.
understand. I just have two more questions because I know
Sure.
your time. Based off of everything that you've studied, researched, and then of course lived experiences. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I guess if you pretended that you did, what do you see in the future in this area? Will violence continue to increase? Are we going to go the other way?
I am optimistic, and this is why I'm optimistic. Um, Now there's cleaning the street. Oh, well, yeah, but let me go back to that. I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic because I see the push of the young people. Right, I am feeling good when I see the understanding of young people that these are going to be our future voters, and the people that are going to be putting lawmakers in, they seem to be a lot more conscious about important social issues, including violence and other things like climate change. So I'm optimistic because I'm liking what I'm seeing from our youth. In the realm of firearm violence, I'm also optimistic because I'm seeing more and more Americans, right? And actually, the majority of Americans are in favor of firearm safety regulations. There has been an outpour of now research funds. One of the things that I was doing this morning, I'm in a panel with the CDC looking at potential future research that can inform anti-violence, right? So I'm seeing that there is an attention, and I'm seeing that our youth are not passive um receptors of this is how they're going to be. They're, as a mother, I sometimes get upset with my child's sass, and he has questions like why, and I want to understand, and I get upset with that. But this is like actual good traits as he grows up, right? That he's not going to be this passive receptor of this is the way it is. And I'm seeing that more and more among our youth. So I am optimistic of what the future has, because I believe that this generation coming up is going to um, not be passive receptors and are going to make a difference.
But I like that. I like that. I think also, sometimes we get siloed in our thinking, but,
Mhm.
students, the youth of today have a totally different experience than the
Mhm.
adults, because, a lot of us grew up when technology was just becoming of age, when
Yeah.
you could be, I'll say, quote unquote, globalized. So I could see where you can, see an
Mhm.
optimism to it, because the youth are able to literally get together with somebody on the other side of the world for a conversation in
Mhm.
minutes. And so they can make a difference that way. My last
Yeah.
question is, where should we start to heal as a nation against violence?
Whew, that's a packed
That's
question. Um, I think we're doing a lot of work in the ground, right, to try to help us heal and to prevent violence and to do anti-violence things. But I think it starts from the top. And I'm happier now than I was 3 years, 3.5 years. Like that was like a nightmare. I forgot about it. But I think it starts with leaders that care, that leaders that try to unite, that leaders that understand the pain that we have gone through, and instead of throwing logs to the fire, they try to unite us in what makes us common, right? So I think it starts from the top. We might be moving there in the direction. I mean, it's not as bad as it was 4 years ago, but our leaders need to do a better job in modeling the type of behavior and the type of empathy that we need, because kids are impressionable, right? It comes from there, from what you see.
Yes, I 100% agree. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jesenia, for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Pizarro, go to www.asu.edu, and you can check out her faculty page to learn a little bit more about her. If you have a passion for an ICER community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. We'd like to send our deepest gratitude to our ongoing show supporter, Blair Chapman. Subscribe to our mailing list at projectgood.org. subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. Plus, get 10% off on any project you start with projectgood.org. Are you part of the Project Good Changemaker community? Sign up today at www.projectgood.org. For our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.